I think as Americans, we have to know why our government is aiding and abetting child trafficking, and we've got to make sure it doesn't happen anymore.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
I think most people, at least in the U.S., are pretty familiar with Epstein's name, but it's a little bit like a sine wave. It comes to, the lexicon of the day and then disappears for a bit, and it comes up and it comes down. Do you think that the information that has yet to be released, but was promised to be released, do you think people even care anymore? Or are they getting exhausted by this churn of, here it comes, no, not yet. Here it comes, oh, not yet.
I found it heartening on X when Bondi served her nothing sandwich that X lit up. People were enraged. And not only people on the right, but there were people on the left that were enraged. A lot of people in the United States want to know why the government covered up child trafficking that was perpetrated by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell et al. We really want to know. And I think that a lot of us want the perpetrators to be prosecuted too. And Bondi promised us so much. She went on Fox television and she said the files were on her desk and that she was going to let them out and there was going to be names and flight logs and things like that. And then when there was nothing, as I said, people got very enraged or frustrated. In 2015, I released Epstein's Black Book and also a number of his flight logs. And
we were talking about this before. That information is already out there.
Yeah. I mean, I released more incriminating information on Epstein et al. Than Bondi did a month and a half ago.
There's another aspect of that, and this is just personal opinion. I found the way that they did it using almost social media personalities, presenting them with a 3-ring binder. I found it to be distasteful at best, but almost disrespectful to the subject matter.
Well, you don't see those influencers that got the 3-binder notebooks screaming about the truth at this point. It's other people. The influencers are kind of on the sideline at this point. I mean, the whole thing, distasteful, outrageous, egregious. I mean, there's a number of adjectives that you can use at this point for what Bondi did. And I believe that she undermined her credibility even more after she said there's a truckload of documents, but we're going to redact documents that have anything to do with national security. And I thought to myself, what does a bunch of child molesters have to do with national security? That's really outrageous that she would say something like that, that child molesters and national security are joined at the hip. So I think Bondi has hurt herself a number of times. She's either come across as a liar or grossly incompetent. It's entirely possible that people were feeding her the information that she espoused, but even so, I mean, that would show signs of incompetence for her just to jump on that information and say it nationwide on national television.
Was there anything new in those 3-ring binders? I mean, I did a peripheral overview of kind of what was in there. There was nothing that blew my hair back. There was nothing that there was not readily accessible access to previously. You obviously have gone deeper than most people on earth on this topic. And I'm just curious your assessment. Was there anything in there that was not already publicly accessible?
No. And actually, this is somewhat humorous, a little tragic, but somewhat humorous. When I put the black book up, I insisted that we redact the numbers of everybody, and I insisted that we redact the names of the victims, the last names of the victims. And we did that. Bondi had the same black book that I put up in 2015, but everything was redacted. Everything. It was 95 pages of redaction. So, yes, we have not gotten any answers whatsoever from the Trump administration. And it's been a month and a half since she released the nothing sandwich. And I think people really want to know answers. And to answer your question, I've been involved in this issue for quite some time. I've been researching and writing about child trafficking for 23 years. And a lot of people, when I wrote the Franklin Scandal, which is a book about a child trafficking network very much like Epstein's. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was researching that, people thought I'd lost my mind that I was writing about it. And then Epstein came along and that kind of sanctified what I'd written. A while back, I was walking in the West Village. I live in New York City. I was walking in the West Village and someone came up to me. He's a friend of a friend. And he came up to me and he was screaming, "You were right. You were right." And so finally, with Epstein, I was vindicated. But with Epstein, given how much I know about Epstein and that I was aware that he was running a trafficking network in 2012 and I was aware of the island in 2012, it's a little disheartening that the mainstream media will not entertain anything I say. There was a document dump last January and I got a call or an email, and then I talked to a producer at CNN, and he said, "Since you released the black book, we'd like to get your feedback on these documents that are coming out." And I said, "Sure, be happy to." So he and I were texting throughout the day, and I was going to go on CNN that night, and at a certain point, I said, because I founded this nonprofit organization called Epstein Justice. I said, I'd really like to talk about the nonprofit organization Epstein Justice too. And then about 10 minutes later, I got an email or a text saying, "Nick, we're going to go a different direction." So, I mean, and that's happened to me a number of times with the mainstream media, which is kind of frustrating.
Do you think that's because there is a nexus and tie behind the scenes between government and media entities on both the left and the right, and essentially somebody somewhere, because of the connection on the topic and what we're talking about, just decides to shut that off?
I'm not aware of any major media outlet demanding justice in the Epstein case. The media has been very good at digging up salacious dirt, most of it true, but none of them have called for justice. And it is true that 6 corporations own 90% of the media. I mean, that sounds kind of mind-boggling, but a number of
it's
people...
demonstrably true. Yeah, you can follow the numbers on that.
And these titanic conglomerates can be broken up with the Sherman Antitrust Act. So there might be a detente between the government and big media about what big media can cover, because the government has a Damoclean sword hanging over the heads of these conglomerates, and they could easily deploy the Sherman Antitrust Act and break them up. And then if you want to get further conspiratorial, there was an operation by the CIA called the Mockingbird, and its goal was to infiltrate the media. And there have been a number of articles written about how the CIA has infiltrated the media. And I published a book last year called The True Story About Watergate, A Tale of Extraordinary Lies and Liars. And I show how heavy the CIA had inserted itself into the Washington Post and how it controlled the narrative of Watergate. And again, with the media not willing to demand justice, what is up with that? We've got Jeffrey Epstein is the most prolific trafficker ever acknowledged by federal law enforcement, and no one has screamed for justice. And I've had a number of very negative interactions with the media where I was just shut out. I mean, the CNN story isn't the only one. There was a producer, a young producer at Fox that had read the Franklin scandal. And this is when the Sandusky Epstein, Penn State stuff was breaking. And she wanted me to come on and talk to the audience about what I knew about the cover up of pedophile networks and what I thought what was going on with Sandusky. And she was dealing with my publisher, and her boss called my publisher and said that, she wanted to talk to me. And so I talked to her boss, who was a senior producer, and we talked for, 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes at the max. And my publisher called her and said, what's happening with your interview of Nick? And the senior producer said, I talked to Nick and he sounded very incoherent. So, and, a lot of people have accused me of a lot of things, but no one's ever accused me of sounding incoherent. So that producer was willing to lie to my publisher and actually completely steamroll the other producer, so I wouldn't get on that particular Fox program. It amazes me that that there has been a media boycott with regards to me, and
almost with regards to the topic. I mean, I was going to ask you. Do you think that there is a day where we are actually going to get? I mean, fully unredacted, I think there's a 0% chance of that, but at least some transparency from any administration. It's not like the previous administration didn't have this information either, So what do you think is actually, I guess, a two-part question. Do you think there's a day where we'll actually ever see anything meaningful? And what do you think is actually stopping the release right now? Because Bondi kicked it over to Patel, saying that they were hiding documents, and it seems to be this back and forth between the FBI and DOJ. What do you think's going on?
You have to keep in mind, as I said, I've been covering this for 23 years. And I believe that blackmail is pretty endemic to our political system. And I'm amazed there's a U.S. Congressman from Tennessee, Tim Burchett, who came out and said, my colleagues are being blackmailed in honey traps. And I'm not, of all the research that I've done in this area, I'm not aware of a congressman or congresswoman saying anything like that, especially a sitting one.
Just for edification, honey trap being some level of sexual liaison that is then used as blackmail against them?
Yes, those are honey traps. And I believe that that's part of our political system. And I believe that it's deployed by intelligence to compromise politicians and other people of power. And
You think our own internal intelligence apparatus is doing that?
I do. And when people ask me about Epstein, they're always saying the Mossad or Israeli intelligence. And,
I've heard that.
and I don't deny that Epstein could have been working with Israeli intelligence. I don't deny that at all. But got something in my throat. But
It happens.
when Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, he had a list of 34 Epstein victims. And he was going to go after them. And then he was told, and this is all over the internet, he was told to stand down, not to prosecute Epstein because Epstein was intelligence. And then that unbelievable deal was worked out where the feds granted blanket immunity to all of Epstein's co-conspirators. And he ended up doing 13 months in a county jail, and he was able to get out during the day and molest minors. And I've talked to legal scholars about this, and there's only two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general, and one is the president. At that time, the attorney general was Alberto Gonzalez, and the president was George W. Bush. Is a attorney general going to cover up a nationwide network without consulting the president? Is he going to do something like that preemptively? I don't think so. So
I would tend to agree.
I think it went to the absolute zenith of the Bush administration, the Bush II administration, when they decided to cover up. Does Israeli intelligence have that much clout with the Bush administration? Or would it be something that the CIA would go to the Bush administration for help? I personally believe it's CIA. And plus, I really don't see the CIA being cool with Israeli intelligence compromising American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard me talk about Firecracker Farm and their hot salt. You probably heard other people talk about it as well. If you haven't tried it yet, let me just tell you, you're missing out on some serious flavor. Their hot salt is delicious, and it really makes pretty much anything that you put it on even more delicious. It's hot, but when you use it in moderation, it's not too hot, and the flavor that it adds enhances without overpowering. It is handmade, super premium, and comes in awesome stainless steel push-button grinders like the one I have in my hand right here. You can take them anywhere. Hot sauce, if you've had this experience, can very easily overpower other flavors and always runs out quickly when it's good. Hot salt lasts and lasts. The push grinder holds over 500 plus pumps, and when you consider the refill it comes with, it's thousands of servings, and it's a great deal and a lot cheaper than the sauce. For those of you that like flavor but hesitate because it might be too hot, you can mix it with sea salt to tone it down and still enjoy the awesome flavor. In my personal experience, you can modulate how much comes out of the dispenser. You're in total control of the amount of heat you serve yourself. So if you would like to support our show and give Alex and his family business a shot, head over to firecracker.farm and use the code IRONCLAD to get a 15% discount on your first order. You will be very glad that you did. Firecracker.farm.
It's interesting, right? If you wanted to get conspiratorial, by charter and doctrine, the CIA is supposed to be an externally facing organization. So it would be a way for them to get around the internal intelligence gathering that they are not supposed to be able to do. And let's be clear, just because something is on paper somewhere and is in the doctrine does not stop organizations from actually participating in those things. And there's a lot of ways that they get around it, whether through it's a cutout organization, whatever it may be, or a contractor as opposed to an employee. So I guess I could see that level of plausibility there too. It's the deeper you go down the conspiracy, I mean, you're talking about, our intelligence gathering apparatus violating its charter and targeting its own citizens in direct contravention to what it was created for.
The CIA has repeatedly done that. Yeah. They've repeatedly carried out domestic programs. So When it comes to the CIA, I have a hard time believing just about anything that is said by that particular agency. It has not been very veritable to the American people.
Do you think there is even a chance that the actual information will see the light of day? I mean, what at this point, I'm not aware of this treasure trove. I did hear the term. I'm not aware of what the contents of that are. I would imagine that there is an argument about what should be redacted and what shouldn't. I mean, that would be my guess, I suppose, as to what's holding it up. What do you think would be in those documents that is just, I don't personally think that we're ever going to see the light of day on anything even close to being unredacted or useful. I think that they will probably, if I was a betting man, they will probably continue to release things and try to find that point of redaction where people are pseudo-satisfied and they'll kind of let it die without going all the way to what was promised, which was actual transparency.
When you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. And consequently, our government is aiding and abetting child trafficking. And I think as Americans, we have to know why our government is aiding and abetting child trafficking, and we've got to make sure it doesn't happen anymore. That's what I believe. And I started an organization called Epstein Justice, and your audience can go to EpsteinJustice.com. And we're working on getting a congressional commission to look at Epstein. And what we want, two very basic things. We want to know why the government covered up child trafficking, and we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. Very simple. And if the government wanted to prosecute the Epstein perps, they could do it tomorrow. They could have indictments tomorrow. On August 29th, 2019, the New York Times published an article that talked about 6 of Epstein's henchwomen and how they were the integral role that they played in conscripting young girls for Jeffrey Epstein's pedophile network. And the article, I mean, it's a New York Times article, full page. The article named Ghislaine Maxwell, Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, Nadia Marcinkova, and Hallie Robson. Maxwell has gone to prison on actually a pretty good deal because she only was indicted on 1 count of child trafficking when she essentially trafficked children for about 25 years, I think. But Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, and Nadia Marcinkova, they know that network. They know who was involved in that network. And the New York Times laid it out right before us. And if the Department of Justice really wanted to act, those 4 women, I'm not including Hallie Robinson. She was like a high school student that was recruiting other students. She didn't know about the bigger picture of the Epstein network. But those 4 that I just named, Kellen, Groff, Ross, and Marcinkova, they could be indicted this week. We could indict them this week on multiple counts of child trafficking. And that's a heavy, heavy sentence in the federal system. That's 15 to life.
Yeah, no. So those are incredible. God, there's so many questions just around that.
But
just around Maxwell, I mean, let's assume, and I think it's not even an assumption at this point, but let's look at the information that we have about Maxwell and her role. She's one of 6 people that we know were in that role when it comes to Epstein in that network. How is it possible? How is anybody supposed to have faith in the justice system when she is indicted on a singular count of something that it is very clear she was involved with for years?
This is going to be up to Americans. I mean, are we going to coexist with a government that's covering up child trafficking or not? I believe we, the people, the government is beholden to we the people before we the people are beholden to the government. And
In theory, that is supposed to work that way.
but with this issue, and as I said, when Bondi served her nothing sandwich, people were outraged on social media. A lot of people, and I'm talking people on the right and the left, were outraged.
Yeah.
And I think the right and the left are so polarized right now that this is probably the only issue that could bring them together.
Yeah, I don't think people who are going to prey upon others, I don't think they look at ideological political lines to decide which side that they want to find their victims. I think it cuts across both sides of the aisle.
And we have to make sure that our federal legislators investigate this with a congressional commission. Congressional commissions and congressional investigations have uncovered a lot of stuff and have really shown that the system can work. The way that Frank Church outed the FBI's COINTELPRO, the CIA's chaos, MK Ultra. There were a number of things that were outed by Congress in the 70s. And we can have that again. I really believe that if the will of the American people is there. And I formed Epstein Justice because I feel that Americans can do the right thing with this. If I didn't think so, I wouldn't have formed it, or maybe I'm just delusional, although I'm not taking any psychotropic medication. Maybe I'm delusionally optimistic that Americans will be outraged about this and we can get that congressional commission. We're going to have a majority in the Senate. We're going to have a majority in the House. And we're going to make sure that people go after these congressmen. If you go to EpsteinJustice.com, we've got a form letter that you can send to your congressional representatives. And actually, you can send it to every congressional representative if you want. And we just need people to start sending the form letters and also to start calling their congressmen and congresswomen. And we have suggestions on how congressional people can be confronted. Last week, there was Jerry Nadler. He's a representative from my district in New York, was having a town hall. And I went to the town hall with a friend of mine, and I was going to ask Jerry Nadler in front of everybody, and my friend was going to be recording this with his iPhone, if he would vote for a congressional commission to investigate Epstein. And that milieu, how are they going to say no? And we also want people to follow their congressional representatives on social media and keep track of them. When are they going to have town hall meetings? Because this is something that we can do. It's going to be a grassroots movement for sure. This is a grassroots movement. There haven't been any big corporations that have said, yeah, Nick Bryant, that's a great idea. I'm going to help you. I've reached out to some people who know some billionaires, and they haven't called me up and said, Nick, that's a great idea. I'm going to give you a couple $1 million. That hasn't happened. The mainstream media, as I said, has boycotted me. But when I first came across this phenomenon in 2002, 2003, I was stunned. I was really stunned. And when I realized that this was a reality of all the books I'd read, my education, I'd worked at a university for 5 years, and I was completely unedified about this paradigm. I was oblivious to this particular paradigm. And I know that a lot of people are, but I also know that because of Epstein, a lot of people are aware. My little brother is in denial about just about everything. I mean, he never has read my books because it would cause too much cognitive dissonance for him. But I was talking to him over Thanksgiving, and I said, the government covered up Epstein. You know that, right? And he goes, yeah, absolutely. And I was amazed that he would just offer that so quickly without any forethought. So I think that there are a lot of people out there. I think that there are millions and millions of Americans that want to know answers about this. And would you trust someone who's aiding and abetting trafficking? There's no way that you would trust someone that's aiding and abetting child trafficking. How can we trust a government that is aiding and abetting child trafficking?
When you asked your brother that, and he agreed with your assessment, was there any indication from him that he wanted to actually see anybody held accountable, or was it just kind of like, yeah, I know, but because the acknowledgement that you may feel that way, it seems as if there's a step missing, and that's the next step where you realize that there has been a wrong, and then you want to have it corrected.
Yeah, I definitely think that he would take the next step for sure. And my family, they haven't read my books. No one in my family has read my books. I mean, because of the cognitive dissonance. But for my brother to start thinking that way, I think it's pretty amazing. I should say I had a brother-in-law that had read my books, but he turned out that he wasn't a very good husband to my sister. I did appreciate him reading my books, but they're divorced now.
Yeah. Statistics are, I think, 51%. So, sometimes that's the way the coin flips for you. So if you were a betting man, I watched this, there was I think it was a little bit of an impromptu reporters asking Trump some questions in the White House. I think it was as early as last week. Somebody asked him about the Epstein files, and he said, he passed it down to Bondi. You have to talk to the AG about that. You talk to Bondi about it. She says, you got to talk to Kash Patel about that. And it's this ability to kind of kick the rock or the can around the room, if you will. If you had to guess, or were a betting man, who is actually preventing the release? Is it one of those three? Is it all of those three? What is actually standing in the way?
I think, as I said earlier, a political system that is rife with blackmail is being protected. And what we saw with the deal that the feds made with Epstein, that it went all the way up to the Bush administration, or I believe that, and I've got a rationale for believing that. I think if the Department of Justice, as I said earlier, if we know who the procurers are, and the New York Times wrote a pretty exhaustive article on it, and we could indict them by the end of the week. It's Bondi and it's Trump. I think that Bondi would probably go for it if I mean, I guess you got to go all the way up the food chain. Do you personally think that Trump is preventing the release of this information? We don't want to think that, but
it's hard to say. I mean, it was a talking point that he based a portion of his campaign on. I'm not going to say it's the flag in the ground that was the anchor, but it was a talking point that came up often. Not that any politician really has a history of living up to all talking points that they ran on. I mean, I'm old enough to realize that oftentimes what politicians say is not exactly what they mean. But I would have to imagine that he would have, if he wanted to, if he asked for it, and maybe this is my naivete about the office of the president, that if he wanted to look at that information or get briefed on it at an unredacted level from either Bondi or Patel, that he would have the ability to do so. And if Patel is the head of the FBI and he is the one who is looking through this documentation and they're just going through this trying to redact it or looking for national security, which is, that's a blanket, honestly, sometimes bullshit phrase that people will use to cover their ass, because how are you going to, we don't want to challenge national security. in my mind, at least when I see that or hear that, like, yeah, I don't want to decrease or threaten our national security. But if our entire government structure at this point is now a self-licking ice cream cone that is existing to protect itself while protecting a human trafficking organization. And often, sometimes I wonder if it's a mistake to always try to attach the name Epstein to this. I was going to ask you that if we need to change the approach, because maybe people are tired of hearing Epstein's name. I don't know what the name would be. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to think of other ways that can get this to be sticky in people's brains that would get them to a place where they would want to take action. But it's somewhere in there, somebody is preventing this information coming out. My suspicion, completely uneducated guess, would be a combination of those three, somewhere between Patel, Bondi, and Trump himself.
I agree with you. I think that information can be released. I think that people can be indicted. And I think that this could happen fairly quickly. If those four pimps, Epstein pimps, if they were looking at multiple counts of trafficking, and as I was saying, it's a heavy sentence in the federal system, it's 15 years to life. And that's exactly how the mafia was taken down. You'd get these small fry crooks on various RICO predicates, and they'd be looking at 100 or 200 years in prison, and they would roll over. They began.
They roll upstream.
So the same thing could happen here. It's basically Epstein was a racketeering conspiracy for sure. I mean, it was a child trafficking conspiracy, but you could also call it a racketeering conspiracy. And Epstein is, if we just say trafficking, that's a pretty, it's a pretty nebulous term, because people don't really know a lot about child trafficking. But if you say Epstein, that's not nebulous at all. You know that Epstein is and this is the reason why I've been in this fight all these years. There's certainly one of the major reasons. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of underage girls in the United States and 5% of underage boys have been molested. A lot of people in the field would say that it's probably a little light on the girls and it's way light on the boys. But if you just go with the CDC numbers, you got over 50 million Americans that have been molested. And I'm using the Department of Health and Human Services, I'm using another government organization, estimates that there are between 240,000 and 325,000 women and children trafficked every year in the United States. And people in the field think that might be a little light, that 325,000 is closer to 240,000. But even if you'd go split the difference and go 300,000 children and women are being trafficked in the United States every year, 300,000. According to the Bureau for Justice Statistics, in 2023, there were 523 individuals that were convicted of sex trafficking in 2023. In 2023. And there are millions of hours of child rape material that infest the internet. And according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, 1,408 individuals were convicted for child pornography in 2023 in the United States. So what we have, I mean, we certainly have a pandemic here, but only a fraction of 1% of the perpetrators of child trafficking and child rape material are being convicted, are being put in prison.
Those are disheartening numbers.
And when you look at the Epstein trafficking network that was around for 25 years, and you look at all the perps and all the procurers or pimps that I named, I know that there were other pimps too, but the ones that I named, if you look at the Epstein trafficking network in its totality, only Ghislaine Maxwell has been convicted. So that's less than 1%.
Yeah, I was going to ask you the other five. So you mentioned there were 6 with women. Of the 6, Maxwell was one. What the other 5? Are they just off fucking around, living their life? Are they even a threat?
Yeah,
oh, God.
They're doing well. I mean, Epstein paid them really well.
Yeah,
and actually, Sarah Kellen married NASCAR driver Rick Vickers.
Spectacular.
And I'm sure they're living happily ever after. She's changed her hair color. I talked to her once, and it was when I was first cutting my teeth on this story. I got her number. I talked to her, and she was really angry at how the media had portrayed her.
Really?
I mean, people like this that don't really have a moral barometer, they just see themselves as being persecuted instead of, I mean, they can't look. Over the years, I've dealt with a number of them. You probably have too. They just can't take any responsibility for their negative actions.
Yeah. Right before we started, you had mentioned there were 2, I don't want to say, breaking, but more modern, one of them being Virginia Giuffre and her suicide in Australia. There's one other thing you said that there was an update. I wanted to cover both of those in whatever order you wanted to.
Well, I talked about Bondi with
Yes.
Virginia Giuffre. I got to know her, and Virginia is she's a sad case of a very sad case of this. She was molested as a little girl, and she was from a dysfunctional family, and her parents started putting her in foster care, and she was on the streets when she was like 12 years old. And at a certain point, she hooked up with a child trafficker named Ron Eppinger, who actually got convicted of child trafficking. And he kept her in an apartment. And pedophiles would come in, pedophiles would go out. She was in this apartment all day and all night servicing pedophiles. And then Eppinger got busted, and she got together with her dad, and her dad was working as a maintenance man at Mar-a-Lago. And she wanted to be a massage therapist, and she was reading a book on massage therapy when she met Ghislaine Maxwell. And Ghislaine Maxwell said, I know a really rich philanthropic type who will pay for, if he likes you, he will pay for your massage school. So that was how Virginia got into it. And because Virginia had been molested multiple times by now, Epstein and Maxwell didn't even have to train her. I mean, she knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And they quickly assimilated her. She became part of the inner circle. And she was flown around the world and molested by a lot of powerful guys.
What do you make of her suicide? Do you think it's just I've had enough conversations now with people who specialize in anti-human trafficking, officers who focus on ICAC, which is internet crimes against children. The victims of these things, the burden that they bear, which shocks me or has continued to shock me, is how often they don't report. If they do report, it's often decades later for both men and women. I agree with you that it is underreported for men. And I think for whatever reason, there's an additional level of shame associated with that for a young man to come forward. but the burden that they carry is just absolutely unbelievable.
Well, she was having problems in her personal life. She came out, she split with her husband of 22 years in January. He was a martial arts instructor, or had been. And she had said that she could no longer handle his physical abuse. And then there was that picture on Instagram that bounced around where she looked severely beaten and battered. And she said it was the result of a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked into that accident, and she was in a car that was hit by a school bus, but and there was $2,000 worth of damage done to that car. But the Australian police, whatever Australian police precinct handled that, said that there was no reports of injuries. And actually that the school bus, that it was the school bus driver hadn't been driving that fast. And then we see these pictures of her, or one picture of her, and she said that she said that it was put on Instagram, but she didn't mean to put it on Instagram. She meant to put it on her private Facebook account. And one source in Australia said that in addition to being hit by the car, she fell downstairs. And I'm still looking into all this. I'm trying to decipher it. But when she decided to leave her husband in January, her husband was preemptive and got a restraining order on her. And her brother and sister-in-law thought that that was kind of a travesty because it was he who was beating up her. But anyway, he got a restraining order, and she texted him. So she broke the restraining order, and actually she was going to have to go to court for that. There were a lot of things going on in her private life, and her husband had the children too. There were a lot of things going on in her private life that were very troubling to her, I believe. And you're right. There's a high correlation between child sexual abuse and suicide. And the younger the sexual abuse, the greater the probability of suicide is. But when I met Virginia, we met on Twitter, and Ghislaine Maxwell was about to go on trial. And I knew, because Ghislaine Maxwell was indicted on three different counts of conspiracy, and no one else was indicted, I just knew that trial was going to be a sham. And I'm a writer. I've never put on a protest before, but no one else was putting on a protest. I called Me Too, and I called a couple of other organizations, and, you know, they were cool with it. So I put on a protest, and I got to know her because I put up a petition, and she was one of the Epstein victims that signed a petition. And she was really gung-ho on starting a state-of-the-art clinic rehab in Florida for victims of child sexual abuse. And she had sued Maxwell for defamation of character, and Maxwell had thrown a number of reptilian lawyers at her. And she stood strong. I mean, and she named her perpetrators, who are very powerful men. So the Virginia that I knew really wanted to take this issue on And she was going to open this rehab with another Epstein victim. But then at a certain point, she just disengaged. She disengaged from me. She disengaged from this other Epstein victim. She just completely disengaged. She went back to Australia. I sent her a couple of emails and she never got back to me. And I know some other people reached out to her and she never got back to them. So it's certainly within the realm of reason that she had been a warrior for victims. She'd stood up to Maxwell. She stood up to Prince Andrew. But there was all that trauma and all that damage in her background. And I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, nor have I ever played a psychiatrist or a psychologist on television, but I have written a book chapter in a book about dissociative identity disorder that was edited by psychiatrists and psychologists. And I've gotten to know quite a bit about dissociative identity disorder because of all the victims I've talked to over the years who were molested at a very young age. And I think that Virginia most likely had dissociative identity disorder. And I hate to make that kind of, it's like, I know that I'm not a psychiatrist and I know that I'm not a psychologist. I hate to make that kind of pronouncement, but I do believe that she probably had dissociative identity disorder. And usually with DID, the wheels come off when people are in their 30s. People learn about their DID relatively late because it works for them. They develop various alters, and if something gets uncomfortable for them, they just switch to another alter. So DID protects them from all the damage that is in their youth. And this happens time and time again, that the wheels fall off when people are in their 30s. Her family believes that she committed suicide. And her family knows that she was in a bad way. And I think that my personal belief is that she was having a lot of trouble in her life. And all that trauma came back. And she couldn't, the levee broke.
Yeah.
And she just couldn't be that warrior anymore. I think that's why she probably disengaged from a number of people that she had gotten to know when she was a real warrior. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation puts on an international summit every year, and I've spoken at 3 of them. And someone at the National Center, I don't know how they knew that I was talking to Virginia, and I asked Virginia if she wanted to present at the at this international summit, and she jumped on it for sure. So we have someone that has had a lot of trauma. She stood up to the world. She was a real warrior. But then at a certain point, she just disengaged from being a warrior, from that life. And her personal life was kind of spinning out of control. And I think that suicide is a reasonable explanation. Her family has no doubts that it was suicide.
Yeah. No, it's a burden to bear that I don't think a lot of people would understand. But honestly, it weaves it back towards maybe a really good ending of our time together today. You recently announced that you're going to be stepping away from your podcast a little bit, focusing on your foundation, Epstein Justice.
I did step away from my podcast.
Yes. Well, I want you to talk about, maybe we'll just close it out with, talk about the foundation, how it helps people, and then how people can get involved. Because having these conversations and educating people, I think, is a great thing. But I think the most powerful thing is hopefully taking whatever motivation they may get from it and actually pointing it in a useful direction.
The thing, I want to say one more thing about the government and victims. When the FBI drilled Epstein's safe, Epstein didn't have like a safe that people think when they think of safes. I mean, he had like a walk-in closet size safe. And when the FBI drilled the safe, according to the New York Times, there were disks. And according to Business Insider, there were hard drives. And there were hundreds, if not thousands, of images of child material in his safe. And we know that the government covered up all the perpetrators in that case. But I seriously doubt, because the government was in full tilt cover up, I seriously doubt that any of those victims were approached and helped. And that's another very troubling thing about this case to me, because the feds came across all that child material. And if you're a minor being used for child rape material, you're going to be so scarred for the rest of your life. And because the government was so fixated on covering up Epstein, I'm pretty positive that they never tried to locate any of those young girls. And that's think of all the Virginias. Mm-hmm. And those girls. And the New York Times said possibly thousands. I mean, how many Virginias were there? And all the Virginias that Epstein trafficked over the years. And people on the internet, they talk about Epstein and they talk about this and that and the conspiracy, and a lot of them go way over the top. But a lot of people don't really talk about the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And these girls are going to be scarred for life. I've gotten to know some of the victims, and some of them have just been through hell. And predators are very, very knowledgeable on how to prey on children. I've seen that time and time again. So the government has failed on so many levels with the Epstein case. And the numbers that I gave to you about the number of children that are molested, the number of children that are trafficked, the number of children that are used for child material, and no one is, less than 1%, a fraction of 1% are prosecuted. So I believe that victims need to be helped. And despite all these government agencies and NGOs that are raking in millions of dollars, we're not doing a very good job helping children that are being sexually trafficked and used for child material. And I think that we have to turn that around. That's why I started Epstein Justice. And your audience can go to EpsteinJustice.com and put their name into it says, do you want to get involved in the movement? Put your name in, and they'll get an email shortly thereafter with various things that they can do to get involved with Epstein Justice. And I think that this is going to be the only opportunity in our lifetime to make sure that networks like Epstein's are no longer protected. And I've been at this a long time, and I get a lot of emails just about every day of people telling me that they were trafficked by this network or that network and who covered it up and how it was covered up. And I think that a lot of them are a little crazy, but then I think a lot of them are telling me the truth. And I think a lot of them are crazy because they were so heavily abused. So we've got over 50 million Americans, conservatively, that have been molested as minors. We've got 300,000 women, children, at least, being trafficked every year. Nobody's paying for it. And this is how we're going to have to put our foot down. I believe that Epstein Justice is the way to go. I think we keep our focus on Epstein. And I think if we keep our focus on Epstein, the lackadaisical or corrupt behavior of our government will ultimately come out. And we will see that there have been a lot of children that have been trafficked with impunity over the years. But I think that because people recognize Epstein, that cuts both ways. I mean, because there's been so much crazy speculation about Epstein, but then there's a lot of people that know that Epstein has been a huge cover up, and they're sick of it. We saw that with Bondi when she served her nothing sandwich.
Well, Nick, as always, man, I appreciate your insight. I appreciate your time. And I suspect we'll be back again for round 3 or 4 or whatever we're at this time. We'll keep going.
Thank you so much for having me on, Andy.